Hey, I'm Craig Zingerline, and I'm going to talk about how to become a kick-ass growth product manager. Let's just dive right in. So, quick intro. Some of the companies that I've worked for or with are listed here on the right. They include Sandbox, Upside Business Travel, Votion, and many more. I've worked in B2C as well as B2B growth, and I've done everything from run product to run growth or running product and growth. So I live basically at the intersection of product and growth. I've also got a pretty deep background with startups, and I'm a serial entrepreneur and founder myself. So growth has been part and parcel to everything that I've had to do along this journey. And hopefully I'll share some good nuggets with you today. All right, so I'm going to start with a definition. So the way I would define growth is that growth starts by ensuring that the product provides value to both the customer and company the entire way through the customer journey or the customer life cycle. So it's all about connecting value. And so when we look at that versus maybe what a traditional product manager is going to focus on, the growth PM is going to have some differences. So traditional PMs typically own a product or a set of features within the product. Growth PMs, on the other hand, will typically own metrics that are likely going to be across the organization. Growth PMs are also going to usually lead experimentation efforts within the organization. And they'll live at the intersection of many different departments. So depending on your company structure and what departments you have, it's likely that the growth product manager will live at each of those intersections. They also may own acquisition or demand gen, depending on the team structure. So I've had companies where I've actually owned marketing and other companies where there's been a marketing team that I'm helping to support. So it really depends on the makeup of the organization. In terms of the user flow and some of the touch points that a product manager will have, users flow through the system. They're basically touched by marketing, product and engineering, and in some cases, customer success, operations, and whatever other departments you might have. And the growth product manager is going to help connect value to those users along the way, but they're going to do that in many cases through each of these different touch points with the departments that you have. So they're not going to work on their own in a silo. The growth PM is likely going to own part or all of the pirate metric funnel. And so I'll just briefly cover this. So acquisition is getting people to your site or your app or your product experience. You may have an awareness piece as well. So if you got a marketing team, your marketing team likely is going to focus on awareness and acquisition. Then there's activation. And I like to define activation as getting people to take an action that you want them to take. Retention, which is getting people to come back again and again to experience your product value. Revenue, which is monetizing your traffic, and then referrals, which is getting people to tell others about your product. Okay, so why the focus on growth product management? Like, why is this important? Well, because most startups fail, and usually not because of bad products. Usually startups fail because of unvetted features or products, or because of poor marketing or market-related issues. And the numbers are actually pretty sobering. So CB Insights did a study on why startups fail. It's called the 2018 CB Insights Startup Postmortem. And these are the reasons why companies failed. So I'll give you a second to digest this. Back in 2006, Paul Graham also had put together a really good list of 18 mistakes that kill startups. So I'll also let you digest this. So why is growth important? Well, 74% of those failures, based on those two studies, actually had something to do with growth. Very few of them had to do with core product development. So growth is just critical. So how does the growth PM change this? Well, by doing the right thing, and here's how. Ensure that the right thing is built at the right time. So whatever feature or product you're working on, think about the timing of that feature or product. Make sure that you've got clear and concise metrics and ways to measure how the adoption of that feature or product development is actually going to happen. It's really important to get that right. Make sure that both sets of stakeholders, so your customers as well as the business, because remember, you're focused on metrics, so that the business is gaining value with each release. So if you have an imbalance there, then either your customers aren't going to get enough value or you, the business, aren't going to get enough value. And as the business, you don't get enough value, you go out of business. If your customers don't get enough value, they leave. So the growth product manager's job is to keep those in balance. And the growth PM is also going to lead the experimentation and iteration that is done in consideration with core product development. Okay, so moving on. So how we usually approach building features, in my view, is often backwards. We start with a ton of ideas. We've got this amazing idea. This feature is really going to move the needle. So we build. And so we say, this is only going to take 3 sprints. I myself as a PM have been guilty of just throwing something out there, spending some time on it without really understanding what the outcome is going to be. And you launch and you said, we're going to rake it in. And then a month later, you're like, that did not work. Okay, we just need to do one more thing. So take that amazing idea and iterate it. This update's really going to move the needle. We're going to build. It's only going to take 2 more sprints. Not that big of a deal. Launch, and we're going to rake it in this time. And what happens? Usually disappointment or failure. So again, I've been very much guilty of this in the past, and I've tried to iterate my own thinking about growth-based product management to make sure that this doesn't happen as often as not nowadays. So what is a product manager to do? What's the growth PM to do in this situation? One thing to do is to really think about the process and approach as you build new features and products. So I'll propose a couple things based on some of the experiences that I've had over the last couple of years. Number one, validate the need first with real users. So all these wacky ideas that you have, or maybe some of the ideas that an executive's coming to you with, whatever the source of that idea is, make sure that you're getting it in front of real users relatively early in the process. Start simple. Get something out basic early if you can, and iterate quickly. Perfection is not the game right now. It's getting a signal. So launch early and fail fast. Get feedback, ideally, again, with real users, real customers. Get stuff in front of them and start capturing that feedback so you build a feedback mechanism that feeds future growth. And use a hypothesis-driven approach. And so when we think about a hypothesis, scientific term applied to growth, becoming fairly commonplace, the way I define it is that by doing or not doing something, we believe that something else will be impacted by some amount of something, right? There's a lot of somethings in there. I'll show you an example in a second. But the other side of it is that PMs really need to give more thought to marketing in general. And so when you think about that, what it means is that at the product level, there's going to be some questions that you want to ask yourself. So why do we need this feature? Who benefits from it? What might this feature detract from? What's our goal with this release? How do we measure the success of this feature or this release? And what's the simplest way we can validate this idea, right? So there's just a ton of stuff that has really nothing to do with the product or the feature itself. It's all about marketing. So you really have to ask yourselves as a growth PM these questions and more to validate it. You also need to be mindful of quote unquote other work. And so what that means is that you're going to have other stakeholders within the organization that this work is going to impact. So outside of the product, ask yourself, what and who do I need to support this feature? Like, who else has to be involved to get this thing out the door? Do I need content? Do I need to write emails? Do I need drip campaigns? Am I running ads against it? What other parts of the marketing funnel does this feature change, right? Like, who else does this impact? How are users going to learn about this feature? And most importantly, in my opinion, is what happens if the rollout fails? Are you comfortable being able to roll back? And so again, failing fast and really being mindful of the process as a growth PM is really important. Okay, so this gets us into some growth-led product development, which really is experimentation at the core of product and feature development. So I talk a lot about the step functions of growth. And what I mean by that is in the early days, you're either doing something or you're not. You're building something or you're not. You're getting feedback or you're not. When it comes to testing in the hypothesis-driven framework, a 0 to 1 test would be starting something really small, probably manually to a small group of people. You iterate on that. You've got this idea. The 1 to 10 step function is where you add a little bit of polish. You might get a little bit more scientific with it. The next iteration is the one that is the 10 to 100 scale, where you start to scale up this idea or this test. You may get team buy-in. The idea at that point might become a feature. And from there, you're working on optimization, so constant incremental improvements. So the ideal life cycle of a product goes through this process where it's vetted in the wild and it's iterated and expanded upon to build something really great over time based on feedback that you're getting. And so here's an example experiment. This is for my current company, Sandbox. So Sandbox is a digital to physical letter product. Our customers are friends and family members of military recruits who go to boot camp and lose their cell phone for 8 to 10 weeks. So this is a very big deal in the military space in the USA, where for those 6 to 10 weeks, that recruit doesn't have any access to the outside world. We provide a way for the supporters to digitally use our app and to compose a letter that gets printed and overnighted to the military bases. It's a really cool product. It's got a huge amount of value. So our platform lets supporters compose and send these letters for basically 20% of the cost that it would take to leverage FedEx or somebody else overnight if they were going to do this on their own. And we sell bundles of letters, so from a single letter to 70 letter bundles that have different price points along the way. Okay. So we had built an MVP promo code system because we couldn't start with nothing in this case. So we spent a little bit of time coming up with a very simple promo code system that we could test in the wild. We had some anecdotal evidence from our customers that said we could increase the purchase conversions by discounting our different tiers or our bundles within our product. So we had some evidence. We thought as a growth and marketing team and product team that there might be some ways we could move the needle if we do this, but we didn't want to go all in. We wanted to use the process to define what we were going to build. So we did have to build some minimal sets of features to support the hypothesis. We also wanted to de-risk any testing by basically only allowing existing customers who had purchased with Sandbox to see discounts. Because we do so much transactional volume, if we ran a growth experiment that went off the rails and it went off the rails quickly, we'd lose a ton of revenue. So we wanted to add this constraint where only existing customers got to see this MVP promo code system. Here's our hypothesis. By leveraging discounts for existing customers, we can increase revenue for a test cohort compared to our control. Okay, so in our 0 to 1 step function, we went from nothing to something. So we wanted to validate the hypothesis and set up something that we could test. So we manually picked a small cohort of people to put into the test. We set a very strict time frame for the initial test. So it was 1 week, I believe, was the time frame. We got a cohort into a test group, and then we ran a campaign. And so we marketed to this test cohort through our CRM platform, the same way we generally do our marketing, but we had sliced the segment of users off to be able to run this experiment basically on its own so that it wouldn't impact the entire customer purchase funnel. We were not looking for statistical significance at this point. It's not critical in the 0 to 1 game. Really, you're looking for some kind of direction or some kind of signal that you're onto something, or maybe that you've got a terrible idea that you're trying to test. So then we went to the 0 to 1, so test something small manually. Okay, this is our control data. So this is the baseline we started at. So on the left is letters purchased for our base of users who purchase. And so our control looked like this. Our first test, we decided to discount the 3-letter bundle. And you'll see what happened here. Versus the control, we were able to move some of the metrics, but when we looked at the revenue in terms of a plus or minus against the control, this test failed. So discounting the 3-letter bundle succeeded in some ways in getting more people to buy the 3-letter bundle. But the problem is that the shift in purchasing behavior ended up resulting in less revenue. So that didn't work so well. So we tested it again. We did a different set of tests around the 3-letter bundle. It failed even worse this time. So again, this is week 1 and week 2 of tests now. Fail. So we're like, okay, that's kind of weird. We can move the behavior up the price matrix, but we're not making as much money. That's a problem. So, we're not winning yet. But because we basically lost revenue by shifting that focus, it was not successful. And so we considered that a failure. So what we did is we went back and we revisited the hypothesis to make new plans based on this new data that we had captured. no change to the product. So we did not have to make any updates to our MVP promo code system. Again, this was not a product thing. This was a market-related failure. In our case, pricing. So we thought about the 0 to 1, and we decided to take on a little bit more risk, and decided to look at our biggest seller, which is that single letter purchase bundle. So the smallest purchase, which is also the highest volume that we do transactionally. At this point, we did want to think about the team a little bit. So, in our case, we pulled in a couple more people with ideas. So if you've got a data scientist or a data analyst or a team here, you're going to likely want to pull them in to get their opinions and thoughts and maybe some data into the process. If you've got a design team, maybe you'll add some polish to the mix. For us, really what it meant was that, we just wanted to bake the idea a little bit more, because even though we failed twice with this experiment, we thought that there was still potential. So we kept pushing on it. So we moved to the 1 to 10. We put a little bit more thought and analysis into it. We came up with a new test, and we ran it. So this time we discounted that single letter bundle, and you'll see that we still saw this shift versus our control, where we thought more people were going to buy the single letter bundle because we discounted that one. But what actually happened was we shifted the purchase down into bigger bundles, and this time the distribution ended up in a positive net result in terms of revenue. So that was kind of interesting. So at this point, we started looking at, okay, well, what's the next iteration of this test? If we can do that for a smaller cohort, how do we scale this out? So here we thought about, okay, increasing the visibility of the test by opening up to more people, thinking of new ways to test the hypotheses. It's worth pointing out that if you fail here, you'll likely have statistical significance, and maybe this test wasn't a great idea after all. Or maybe you need to go back to the drawing board a few more times like we had to do. If you succeed, you may actually have a feature or a backlog item. So that's the point where you start to build. So for us, this meant looking at that risk equation again. So we wanted to remove that constraint that we had originally on only customers being allowed to send the first letter. So we opened it up, and we went for a more blanket approach that said anybody could use this promo as a first-time sender. And so we said, let's give it a try. Worst case, it fails and we lose some revenue. We kicked the tires with it. At this point, we built some new features to scale on, but it was only at this point, after getting the data from the prior test, fail, and a couple wins, that we said, okay, we're willing to invest a little bit more in the product to open it up to this bigger audience. And so we spent a little bit of time on that. So here's where we're at with the step function, that 10 to 100. Okay, so in terms of how we kind of look at this vetting in testing ideas, so we went back and we said, okay, we've got this amazing idea. This feature is really going to move the needle. Build. It's only going to take 3 sprints. Let's rake it in. And we had a winner. So when we followed that same process as before with this latest iteration of product development based on the test data, we won. And here's what happened. The next 3 iterations of the test, when we opened this up and expanded the scale of it, you can very clearly see here that we are getting into close to 25% increase in revenue for a cohort by doing bigger discounts off of bigger letter bundles. So again, this would be very, very industry and product specific for what you're working on. And your metrics here will be different. But for us, what we found was that over the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, the 9th, the 10th test, we were really able to get into that double-digit positive ROI growth side without really having to build anything else other than that simple iteration on the pricing model that we put in place. And so at this point, we got into constant incremental improvements and optimization. And so for us, we now have an always-on discount that appears basically based on some business logic that we've validated through these tests. And we continue to test multiple different hypotheses and different ways to reach cohorts of users to try even wackier things. But when we sat down and kind of looked at the net impact of this approach, we saw a roughly 20% increase in revenue compared to the control on an ongoing basis. So for many, many months now, we've actually seen a close to 20% increase in revenue from the same batch of users compared to the control, which is fascinating. So that's it. I mean, I would really urge you to take a very growth test specific viewpoint when you're building features and when you're building new products. Get multiple people within your organization involved in coming up with the ideas, but be really disciplined and dedicated about how you actually approach those step functions of growth, because it's likely that you've got a lot of the right ideas, but the timing and the way you actually go about releasing those features may not be supported by the needs that your customers or your business has at that time. So I'll leave you with that. If you hit my website, you can get some free resources, some frameworks and things like that I've put together, or just email me, and I'm generally pretty responsive. Share any feedback that you've got, and if you've got any questions, just hit me up. And thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it.